this lovely Sunday morning of 6 September 2020, which marks the beginning of our first academic event for the year 2020 by our very own Indian Prosthodontic Society Mumbai Navi Mumbai branch, which was the birth ground of the prestigious Indian Prosthodontic Society way back in 1972, almost 50 years back, and led by our pioneers and legends of prosthodontics. Yesterday, 5th September, marked Teachers' Day. So to commemorate this day, we dedicate today's event as a tribute to all our gurus who have shaped us in the elements of our professional and personal well-being. As the Secretary of the Indian Prosthodontic Society Mumbai Navi Mumbai branch, I feel privileged to welcome our President, Dr. Sharad Shetty, our speaker for today, Dr. Ali Tunkiwala, our renowned panelists for today, beloved Dr. Sabita Ram, Dr. Milind Karmarkar, our program coordinator for today, Dr. Parmeet Banga, IPS Head Office, IPS EC, my dear fellow colleagues, and my dear students, for this online webinar session made to happen by our social media partners, Dentist Channel Online. Though this year 2020 began with a cloud of COVID fear, we have slowly evolved to be more careful and not fearful. As we now stream into positivity, and our branch has planned a number of activities for all of us here, beginning with today's session, our live webinar session, launching of our website, launching of our e-journal under the able guidance of our branch editor, Dr. Naisargi Shah, compilation and upload of scientific content, seminars, journal clubs, scientific literature for our very students, and also some social activities like slogans and poster competitions. I humbly appeal to each one of you to become life members of the Indian Prosthodontic Society and participate actively for its growth and glory. On this promising note, I now request our branch president, Dr. Sharad Shetty, to deliver his welcome address.
Thank you, Saloni. I think that was a stunning opening for today's session. Good morning, my dear friends. As the president of Indian Prosthodontic Society, Mumbai Navi Mumbai branch, welcome to our first webinar. On the occasion of Teachers' Day yesterday, I too extend my heartfelt gratitude to all my formal and informal teachers for instilling the character and enlightenment in me. And I salute all of you there, as you all deserve to be celebrated. Mumbai has been the pioneer melting cauldron of prosthodontic sciences and centers for advanced prosthodontic treatments, and has produced exceptional prosthodontists and academic faculties of repute. As a professional local branch, IPS Mumbai Navi Mumbai has undertaken prosthodontic education seriously and endeavors to spread both academic and clinic reach effectively. Unfortunately, we are in an era of unpredictable COVID-19, but we have not allowed it to dampen our spirits and activities. The webinar is one such effort, and Dr. Saloni has already laid down a slew of measures undertaken by our club. And today's presentation by my dear friend, the accomplished Dr. Ali Tunkiwala, on a very relevant topic will help you in your path of progress and arm you with the latest and best knowledge in the field. I also appreciate and acknowledge the presence of our panelists of eminent prosthodontist Dr. Sabita Ram and Dr. Milind Karmarkar. I also applaud the efforts of our today's hostess, Dr. Saloni Mistry, and coordinator, Dr. Parmeet Banga, for conceptualizing this program seamlessly, and also to my energetic team of executive committee members for their relentless and coordinated responsibilities. Our partners for today's program, Doshi Marketing Corporation, Bradent Group of India Private Limited, and of course our media partners, Dentist Channel Online. My sincere thanks. So friends, have a great learning feast today, and let's meet at the end of the presentation again. Yeah, back to Saloni.
Thank you, dear sir, for your kind words. I now take the privilege to introduce our expert panelists for today, our very own Dr. Sabita Ram. We know her as the First Lady President of the Indian Prosthodontic Society 2004 to 2006. She was the president of our IPS Mumbai Navi Mumbai branch when we hosted the memorable 44th IPS in 2016. Dean faculty, a great academician, Madam has been the recipient of the Shushruta Award for Empowered Women Dentists. Has the Lifetime Achievement Award and so many to name. Well, Madam, we are privileged and honored to have you here with us today. Our second panelist, Dr. Milind Karmarkar, is a renowned clinician, a humble prosthodontist known for his clinical acumen and expertise. He has been the head of the department at BVP Dental College and the fellow of and vice president of ISOI. Sir is known for his expertise in prosthodontic and implant specialty. Sir, we are really, truly honored to have you with us here today. I now want to speak something about why have we chosen occlusion as today's topic. Occlusion has been the battleground of dentistry, and full mouth rehabilitation has always posed a channel to even an able clinician. Hence, our today's webinar topic has been judiciously chosen by our favorite speaker, Dr. Ali Tunkiwala. Mere words aren't enough to speak for his accolades and the depth of his knowledge. Without further ado, I call upon our program coordinator, Dr. Parmeet Banga, to formally introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Ali Tunkiwala.
Thank you, ma'am. It's an honor to introduce Dr. Ali Tunkiwala, who actually doesn't need any introduction. Dr. Ali has done his graduation from Nair Hospital Dental College in the year 1996 and master's in the Department of Prosthetic Dentistry under Dr. Sabita Ram ma'am in the year 1998 from Government Dental College and Hospital, Mumbai. Accredited member of the American Academy of Cosmetic Dentistry, fellow and diplomat of the International Congress of Oral Implantologists and Indian Society of Oral Implantologists, speaker, International Team for Implantology, that is ITI, serves on editorial board of various journals and periodicals, authored and edited a book of partial extraction therapy in implant dentistry, and of course, he was a oration speaker for 44th IPS conference, Mumbai. With a big heart, we welcome you, sir, and everybody is eagerly waiting to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Parmeet Banga. I request the much awaited session by our Dr. Ali Tunkiwala now to begin. I request all our participants to kindly put their questions only in the question answer box, not in the chat box, just in the question answer box, which will be addressed after the presentation. Over to Dr. Ali, all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Saloni, and it's my pleasure to be in this first big academic endeavor by the IPS Mumbai Navi Mumbai branch, and I feel like I'm sitting in a viva with my postgraduate teacher there as a panelist, so I better get everything right. And it's an honor to have Dr. Milind Karmarkar on the panel too. And while I do my PowerPoint ready, I'm going to get to the point because I have limited amount of time and I want to make the most use of it. So thank you, Dr. Sharat Shetty, for giving me this opportunity to be here amongst this August gathering. My goal today is to try and focus on some aspects of occlusion which are overlooked a lot. And I'm going to try and make sense of all the markings that we do with papers and also see to it that I make it very clinical. And I assume that there will be a large number of postgraduate prosthodontic students on this webinar. And sometimes I may go into a little theoretical aspect. I'll try to give you as many references as I can, but we can continue chatting on that theoretical aspect a little later. My goal is to try and make this completely clinical. So what is basically occlusion is the act of upper and lower teeth meeting each other in static and dynamic movements. And if these contacts between the upper and lower teeth are harmonious, we will be able to make our restorations, and the teeth and the surrounding environment, the periodontium, joints, muscles will all remain in good stability with each other. occlusion is very confusing, and it's confusing because it's forgiving. For example, if occlusion was very uh, finicky about how everything has to be, we would have a large number of patients who are very unhappy with the treatment that we do, and then we would be with our backs against the wall to find answers much faster. But because this is a very forgiving branch of dentistry, many of us get away without the use of articulators, get away without the use of diligent occlusal techniques. And because of that, the dentistry that we do sometimes survives in spite of not being perfect, and thankfully so. And we owe that adaptability to the system. The stomatokinetic system allows a little bit of imperfections in occlusion, and we are going to take leverage of that imperfection in the system to allow us to get away with slight mismanagement of occlusion while keeping the entire picture as disciplined as possible. Right from my postgraduate days, we've learned that this subject needs a lot of discipline to master the concepts, and occlusion is the ultimate creation of your prosthodontic work, the end result. But to get there, you have to set up the case so well that each step does not require too many changes. And if that doesn't happen, you will end up with a good occlusal scheme, whether you're dealing with implant prosthodontics or whether it's prosthodontics on natural teeth. What would be ideal occlusion for us, for human beings, is that it has to be bilateral and equal. It has to be uniform on both sides, anteriorly, posteriorly, as well as left to right. It has to be simultaneous so that we don't have one tooth coming in contact first and getting submerged in its PDL, and then having other teeth come in contact, because that first tooth that comes in contact will get overloaded. So you want a large number of teeth to simultaneously come in contact. We should have occlusion which allows harmonious jaw function and does not cause any joint instability. And if we can assume that our occlusion will match these requirements, we'll be in good stead with what we have achieved in our patients. I also want this occlusion to be visible in demand, because most of the times when we finish up a case, we just have white tooth structure everywhere, and we don't know how this tooth structure is interacting with the opposing tooth structure in static and dynamic positions. So if I can visualize the occlusion, if I can make it visible, I can adjust it better. And that is the goal of these 40 minutes which I have with you, to try and make occlusion visible so that we are able to make adjustments as required. Now we know that occlusion is sometimes very forgiving, obviously, but sometimes it is so unforgiving that the patient goes back home with a simple class 1 filling, and the high points that we have left on the slopes of the cusp now make the patient so uncomfortable that he contacts your practice again and wants to come back to get that point out, because he just does not feel comfortable. And if you see, in essence, occlusion is all about patient comfort. If the patient doesn't feel comfortable, that means your occlusion is not adjusted well enough. You need to get that adjustment done so that the patient gets very comfortable. And you see these small red circles on the tooth, those are my eccentric contacts. So patient on the chair in static occlusion was very fine. The moment the jaw started moving when he went back home, he realized that these high points on the slopes of the cusp create interferences in his harmonious jaw function, and he needs to take them away. And when he comes back to you, you need to have the right papers to be able to mark that point so that you can adjust it. Now, for you to be able to mark that point, the patient should be able to be doing that motion which causes these high points to be there. And that's what we will learn, how dynamic occlusion adjustment has to be done. Because static occlusion adjustment is something which is talked about a lot, it is written about a lot. So dynamic occlusion adjustment is what we will focus on. Now, when I start with a case like this, where I need to do a full mouth rehabilitation, change the vertical dimension, in air, I have to build up new teeth with proper occlusal adjustments done, while maintaining the anatomy and the aesthetics and the perio-restorative harmony. The occlusal adjustment also has to be done well. It should be so well done that when I look at the occlusal scheme in the beginning, and in this pre-op picture here, the patient has no occlusal scheme at all. The dentine is exposed everywhere. Whenever the patient undergoes any dynamic occlusal movement, there is no relief for any tooth groups, and all of them simultaneously come in contact and create what is known as occlusal friction. And this friction leads to overload, and overload leads to wear of enamel, and eventually in this case dentine. Of course, this picture is not only an occlusal problem, it's also a problem because of acids which have come into the system, but that's a discussion for another point. I'm going to do a rehabilitation for this case, and when I finish my occlusal rehabilitation, I want uniform contacts of equal intensity on both sides on all the posterior teeth from canine backwards. And these occlusal contacts have to be achieved with articulating papers of specific dimensions so that you are able to mark well. And these are specialized papers which can mark heavy contact and light contact for us and allow us to see which contacts should be adjusted so that the contacts are bilateral, uniform, equal, simultaneous, and allow for harmonious jaw function. So we will go through the adjustment protocol in just a short time. These occlusal adjustments are applicable for our implant cases also, more so for the implant cases, because when I have upper and lower full fixed implant prosthodontic work done for a patient, the patient has lost all his proprioception that was there in the periodontal ligament. And that periodontal ligament proprioception was my adaptive capacity. It was my leeway in the occlusal system to allow me to make this occlusion more forgiving so that the natural dentition can adjust it and adapt to it. But the implant dentition cannot adjust to this. There is no adaptive capacity, and occlusal overload in such a case will lead to quick breakdown of the ceramic work, or it will lead to biological breakdown in form of occlusal load, which will lead to bone loss and then eventual failure of the implant. So occlusal adjustment for implant has to be much more diligent because adaptive capacity of the PDL is lost. The same diligence in occlusal adjustment is also required for aesthetic cases. So we will see to it that we follow the same principles for aesthetic work, although today I'm not going to have much time to delve into the aesthetic aspect of these occlusal adjustments. Now, over the years, especially in prosthodontic literature, from the 1920 onwards, since the time Schuler has come into the picture, then there was Pankey, Mann, Dawson, so many big names. But over the years, these university-based teachings and literature publications have made this entire subject very stern and very dogmatic in its approach. And we need to move away from this and slightly open our mind to looking at the dynamism of occlusion. And so today I'm going to speak about some things which might not really go with classic prosthodontic literature, and we need to all as postgraduates find out answers to these things which we are discussing today. So gnathology was what I was introduced to, and at one point I had all these principles by heart, and we always related the anatomy of the teeth to the anatomy of the joints and the other structures in the stomatocratic system, which is not true at all. We said that the lingual or the anterior guidance of the anterior tooth should be matching the condylar guidance, and each posterior tooth should fall with its cusp form in between these two end limits of the occlusion, if I may say so. And these were pictures that were put forward to us by various engineers and mathematicians, and it made a lot of logical sense. But tooth form and how the lingual surface of the anterior tooth will be is made by genetics. In the womb, 5th week intrauterine, the data for how the lingual surface of the upper central incisor is going to be there is already made by nature. So we cannot just rely on the existing bony landmarks, and we need to move away and look at a broader picture from dynamic occlusion point of view. We also see that we were very, very finicky about getting very tight interdigitation. Tripodal contacts, which was a basic tenet of mutually protected occlusion, is very difficult to achieve. And in my 25 years of practice, I don't think there has been any case in which I have been able to maintain tripod contacts in an adjusted occlusion in a living human being. So we need to move away and broaden the contacts to have more cusp fossa relationship and not be very dogmatic about these diagrams that we see. Any textbook that teaches you occlusion only by drawing diagrams is something which I don't really believe in, because that is going to be mathematics and engineering. I want to see occlusal contacts marked with articulating paper in a living, eating human being. And that's what I'm trying to achieve here. So what I want to do here is not break the system into its morphologic parts, look at the broader picture and try to see how human beings actually chew. Long back in the 1920s and 30s, when the first chewing pathway studies were done by Lundin and Gibbs, who published a book, they put graph papers on the upper and lower jaw, and they put devices on the human face and asked the human being to chew food of different textures. And they published in their book that the chewing cycle, which is the border movement of which is the Possel's curve, but inside that curve is the human being's chewing cycle. And in that chewing cycle, maximum amount of food is eaten. So if your teeth do not come in the way of that chewing cycle, you are going to be in good occlusal scheme in the end from a dynamic viewpoint. We learned these three terms, and balanced occlusion is so reserved for full, complete denture prosthodontics. We'll not touch it right now in this webinar in 30 minutes that we have. But mutually protected occlusion is something which we believe should be there in the natural dentition. So when anterior teeth come in contact, there should be no posterior contacts. And when right and left lateral excursions are done, canine is the only tooth that should touch and no other tooth should come in contact. Well, let me show you a few pictures and then we'll discuss whether this should really be our end point of occlusion in human beings today. Look at this picture. The patient is 44 years old. And according to me, she has got a very good occlusion at 44 years. There is no wear of teeth apart from a little abfractions, which could be because of the action of proteolytic enzymes from the gingival sulcus. It could be because of toothpaste, that type of lesions. It's not necessarily that these abfractions in this case are because of occlusion. I would say that this anatomy is very good. So this patient theoretically should be having a mutually protected occlusion. So I said, okay, let me study the occlusion. And I made her protrude her teeth. And when she protrudes her teeth, there is no contact of the incisors at all. Only posterior teeth come in contact. When she goes in right lateral excursion, the canine does not touch. Only the posterior teeth come in contact. When she goes in left lateral excursion, only the premolars and molars come in contact on the left working side, and there is no contact of teeth on the right working side. So if this is how ideal occlusion should be, why does this patient doesn't have mutually protected occlusion? Second, if she doesn't have that mutually protected occlusion, should I treat her today to make her conform to the dogmatic principle which I've learned from the theory from 1920s onwards? That is my question, open to all postgraduate students to discuss in your seminars, in your meetings, and find out why this patients and many like these do not have mutually protected occlusion in their dentition. Some of them have abject malocclusion. They need severely orthodontic treatment at their adolescent age, but their dentitions don't break down. Why is the question we need to ask. Let's see the other side of the spectrum. This patient has mutually protected occlusion. She has got anterior guidance, posterior disclusion. Look at her right lateral excursion. She has got almost anterior group function, no posterior teeth come in contact. Left lateral excursion, anterior group function. She is meeting all the dogmatic principles that are being taught to us in our postgraduate studies. Then why has this dentition broken down? So we need to find these answers to these tough questions, because now we are at an age today where from the Kois Center, they have done studies on 3D CBCTs with dynamic occlusion scheme, and they have found out that almost 30 to 40% of the population doesn't have mutually protected occlusion. Then why we as prosthodontists are struggling and over-treating sometimes our dentitions to get that picture, okay? So if I'm not giving mutually protected occlusion to my patients, am I against it? Not at all. All my cases will end up with mutually protected. But instead of looking at the dentition from inside out, I'm going to look at it from the outside. Okay, so we want to pay attention here to this statement that cookbook recipes and numbers. If you tell me that the overjet should be 2 millimeters and overbite should be 2 millimeters, in the entire human race, I don't agree with that, because human beings are different. Somebody in Africa is going to have a different jaw size than somebody in Korea. You can't have the same numbers. This is not a recipe which we are cooking. So we have to find human adaptability and then allow the dentition to work within the purview of that adaptability. Our human system doesn't work right working, left working, and protrusive. Nobody goes home and goes in MIP and protrudes teeth to eat. That is the only motion which dentists do on their chair. How do human beings eat? They open their mouth, put food inside the mouth, and then they start to chew from outside inward. That is the dynamic occlusion that we chew with. And that is the chewing pattern. That is what we call as the chewing pathway, which we need to adjust our occlusion to. And you may have the best of mutually protruded occlusions when the patient protrudes, anterior teeth touch, and everything discludes. But if your chewing pathway is not taken care of, you will have a breakdown in that system. Either the ceramic will fracture, or your periodontal breakdown will happen, or there will be joint instability. Now, when I am deciding an occlusal scheme for a patient, I am going within the purview of mutually protected occlusion, but in the end, I am making my mutually protected occlusion in harmony with the chewing pattern of the patient. That's what I want to implement. So this is my daughter on screen over here around a few years back, and I asked her to chew gum while I did her recording in slow motion. And if you see, she is not starting her chewing cycle with MIP and protruding and going right and left lateral. She's opening her mouth, going to one side, then chewing in and coming back into MIP. Then she does that on the other side, chewing in and coming into MIP. So MIP is not the starting point of occlusion. MIP is the end point of occlusion cycle. And that is why when you're adjusting your occlusion, you should adjust with the patient chewing like this, as if they are chewing food. And then your occlusal adjustment will be better off. And I'll illustrate this with a lot of examples. Okay, so let me make this statement. The brain has established a chewing pathway for adolescence from time first permanent teeth start to come. Even before that, actually, when deciduous teeth start to come. And your teeth should not come in the way of that pathway. If you make that occlusal adjustment not conflicting with the brain, the adjustment will be better and last you for a longer time. We all have heard what is anterior guidance, but this anterior guidance is basically a very static position. I can make any case with long anterior teeth and protrude and show you that I've achieved mutually protected occlusion, but that's not going to be the way the patient will go home and chew. The patient will go home and chew in his chewing pathway, which Dawson refers to as the envelope of function. When Dawson says that you have to have anterior guidance, we all followed that, but we forgot the rest of his statement, which said that the anterior guidance should be within the, or should be in harmony with the envelope of function. So I'm looking more at the envelope of function, the pathway, and less to the static anterior guidance. So if I end up with a case in which I have no anterior guidance, but my chewing pathway is correct, I am happy. I am okay to leave that patient with minimal overjet, minimal overbite, sometimes even edge to edge bite, sometimes very deep bite, and still be okay, so that I don't have anterior guidance, but I will always have a chewing pathway adjustment done for my patients, because this is dynamic and that's how human beings eat. So remember this point, anterior guidance is inside out, pathway adjustment is outside in. You can make your entire occlusion build inside out, but the final adjustment before the patient gets up should be outside in. That's your chewing pathway adjustment. There are certain steps I follow in all these full mouth rehabs. Of course, we are not going to go into these, but because we follow these steps, we end up with usually good occlusal schemes in the end. We all know that our end point of good occlusion is that centric occlusion and MIP should be the same and in harmony with centric relation. And if we don't have this harmony, we can either equilibrate the occlusion or we can raise the vertical dimension and do a full mouth rehab. Eventually, at the end of a prosthodontic treatment, you want to achieve harmony between centric and MIP. That's the goal for all our cases, okay? And many a times when you see the top part of this picture, the patient at MIP is fine. There is tight interdigitation of occlusion, but in centric occlusion, after I've deprogrammed the patient, only the posterior teeth come in contact and no other teeth are touching. That means the patient's jaw wants to be somewhere else and the teeth are wanting to be somewhere else. And that disharmony between the two is leading to joint pain and muscle instability. And I need to remove this disharmony so that the patient will have MIP in harmony with CR. So I assume that everybody understands this basic principle of all prosthodontic treatment. To get a good occlusal scheme, I need to make use of deprogrammers. Deprogrammers are various designs, starting from the Lucia jig, the NTI devices, the leaf gauge, but my go-to device for all patients in these days is known as a Cois deprogrammer, which is an anterior ramp onto a Hawley's plate, which has a passive label bow for retention. And this particular device will have a one-point contact with the lower anterior teeth and will allow me to deprogram the patient so that I can build my occlusion in harmony with CR. So the key to understanding occlusion, to understand how the brain finds teeth. It finds the teeth by the best fit of teeth and not by guidances. The brain does not need to couple with the cuspid and then tell the cuspid to take the jaw home into MIP. The brain can find MIP even if cuspid is missing. So I don't need canine protected occlusion. I just need a chewing pathway without any tooth coming in the way. Now, if the brain cannot find this maximum intercuspation without teeth bumping into each other, then you will have a MIP which is going to be disharmonious with the jaw movement, and that will lead to instability in the joint. So how do I define this for a prosthodontist? I will tell you to keep the anterior guidance there, but in the end, see that the anterior guidance is not too much. The anterior guidance has not become anterior friction. The anterior guidance should remain in control within the harmonious jaw chewing cycle so that the brain doesn't find this to be a friction point. If the brain cannot find the teeth easily, then what will it do? It will make the system adapt. And the price of that adaptation in the human being is attrition, its mobility, and its temporomandibular joint disorder. You want to avoid these in your reconstructions. You have to have MIP in harmony with CR and a chewing pathway in which the brain can find teeth easily without any teeth bumping into and coming into the way of that closure. So when I say how to treat, there are two ways I can treat this occlusion. One is to equilibrate. And when I'm looking at equilibration, I'm basically looking at a design in which I'm going to mark a few things with an articulating paper and then make those adjustments as I will illustrate further. How do I define occlusal equilibration? Occlusal equilibration is the controlled destruction of the tooth surface or a restoration aimed at reducing the biologic price the dentition will eventually pay if it is not done. This is not a definition from any textbook. It's something which I feel is what we do in occlusal equilibration. Before you start taking a burr and cutting down teeth, do a mock occlusal equilibration. Do it on an articulator. Mount the cast with the CR, get the points marked well so that you know what is the scope of equilibration that you need to do, and get the MIP in uniform contacts in harmony with CR on the articulator first. Once you have done enough on the articulator, a few cases, then you can start directly equilibrating in the patient's mouth once your deprogramming has been done. Now, occlusion equilibration is not a blind process. I need certain armamentarium with me. And I don't need the armamentariums to be so heavy that I can't understand what needs to be picked up every time. So I have certain parameters I follow. I use these 4 or 5 sizes of articulating paper and I have nothing else in my clinic. I use a 40 micron paper, red or blue, for all my routine occlusal adjustments. 3-unit bridges, inlays, onlays, single implant. This is my go-to paper, okay? And it will come as a box like this with sheets, which I will take, and then I will do the occlusal adjustments. I will also need a 8 to 12 micron paper, which will come in a foil like this, a roll, which I can cut the size which I want. And this is where I will use my last paper. 8 micron to 12 micron paper is where the final occlusal adjustment have to be done in the patient's mouth for all your cases. So you need a bulk of this. You need a shim stock. A shim stock is a metallic sheet like this, just a metallic sheet 8 microns thick, which can be used to make your final occlusal adjustments in your patient's mouth. And you will need a horseshoe shape 200 micron paper. Rest all papers are rectangular. This one you need a horseshoe shape 200 microns. Okay, and I will teach you in the next few slides what to do with these papers in the sequential manner. Okay, I want to use these papers from Bosch, available from Doshi Marketing. You can buy them from Liberal Traders in India, and from Bosch in all the rest of the world. And these papers have a special ability to mark heavy and light contacts, so I can distinguish as to what should be adjusted and what should not be adjusted. Okay, so you see this arrow mark over here, it shows me a heavy contact with a rim of ink around it and a light mark in between. That's the halo of the dark mark, and the light mark is in between, which is the actual heavy contact where the paper has got perforated. If I see a full dark mark, that means the occlusion is not heavy there. There is a lot of thickness of paper there. The paper didn't get perforated. That means that point I don't need to adjust. Okay, so I will do occlusal equilibration directly in the patient's mouth using the Coy's deprogrammer. I'll show you how. So for occlusal adjustments, 2 positions are required in the patient. First of all patients are going to eat upright position. Nobody eats with their head up like this, supine. Everybody eats with sitting posture. So your final occlusal adjustments have to be done with the patient in sitting posture. But you start in a semi-supine 45-degree reclined position, use a 240 micron paper and make those marks go on adjusting, and then come upright and finish up your adjustments. And this article over here shows how occlusal adjustments will vary with the chair position, and why 96% of your occlusal adjustments, which are dynamic, have to be done in the upright position and not in the reclined position. So what are my steps? I'll first find the initial contact, remove that contact, continue with the equilibration, finalize equal intensity contact with the 8 micron paper, and then do the chewing pathway adjustments with the 200 micron paper. Here's my patient. I'm doing a full mouth rehab for her. She's being deprogrammed with a Coy's deprogrammer. And why I've chosen this is because I have provisionals in place. And because I have provisionals, my occlusal markings will come very nice. So I'll be able to teach you better. Okay. So once she's deprogrammed, I'll go on adjusting the ramp. So the vertical dimension will go on reducing. And at one point, one contact will happen, as you can see on the distal surface of the second molar here. That's the first point of contact. How did I get that? With a 200 micron horseshoe shape articulating paper. So as soon as the patient tells me that something is touching, I put this paper in the patient's mouth, tell them to touch, and then go ahead and get that marking done. Once I've adjusted that mark, I will go on reducing the vertical dimension on the deprogrammer, and then I'll shift to a finer paper. I'll shift to a 40 micron and go on adjusting such that I get uniform contacts on all teeth. Where should I get the contacts? On the centric cusp of the lower and the upper, and on the fossa of both the upper and lower teeth. And I'm not looking at the number of contacts. I should get one good contact on each tooth. That's all I want. I don't want 2-3 contacts on every tooth. That's good for diagrams. Okay. So here you see my picture. I've got one good contact on each posterior tooth. In certain areas I don't have contacts. I'll go on getting them as I go on reducing the ramp. Once the ramp is totally gone, I will now finish with the 8 micron paper. With the 8 micron paper, I want one good contact on each tooth from canine backwards. Okay, so that's what I will achieve. If I don't get a contact, if I get a contact on most teeth but don't get on one tooth, I can add material on that tooth where I'm not getting contact. I don't have to reduce everything else and reduce the vertical dimension. I can add composite where I want to and get the uniform contact where required. Okay. And that's the picture you want to see with the 8 micron paper. Canine backwards, each tooth has now a uniform, good contact, one contact per tooth. Now I will do pathway adjustments. And this article is important for you because it tells you that anterior guidance is a myth. It's a myth by a group of clinicians published well who have now brainwashed us into thinking that if we get anterior guidance, we are good. But as I illustrated earlier, we need to get anterior guidance along with the chewing pathway adjustment. And that how to do is explained very well by Dr. John Coyce and Dr. Beekman in this article. And you can Google for this article, and the full text is available for free download for everyone. Okay. So how do I do it in the patient's mouth? I put the 200 micron paper, making the patient sitting upright, and tell the patient to chew this paper as if he is chewing food. And when I get this marking done, I will now look at these markings. And when I look at these markings, I have to now learn how to interpret these. These are not static contacts. These are dynamic contacts. So which of this I should keep and which of them I should remove? You see, I have made arrows over here to show you that as the patient goes out and comes in, he will contact the palatal slopes of the buccal cusp of the upper teeth, and those are creating friction as he comes into MIP. The brain will find them as interferences. So I'm going to take a burr and reduce all these marks that you see as chewing pathway interferences. So this is a very clear picture of telling you what to reduce. You do not reduce anything on the palatal cusp of the upper because those are your centric cusps. So you don't reduce those. Okay. And now I've reduced the chewing pathway and I ask the patient to chew again and they feel comfortable, and I leave this occlusion at this stage with the chewing pathway adjustments removed. Now, if I would keep those chewing pathway adjustments, I still had anterior guidance. On a postured picture, I can show you that, look, I got canine guidance. But in the dynamic picture, you have not removed the friction contacts. So that's what we are looking at. When do I say that I've achieved occlusal equilibration for a patient? When cuspid backwards, all teeth have at least one good contact in MIP and can hold a shim stock. The bite should be crisp, not a dull thud. And when the patient goes into chewing motion, there should be no lateral streaks on any posterior teeth or incisors. But I will allow those lateral streaks to be there on the cuspids and control them so that the cuspids are not heavily overloaded. And there should be no fremitus. Okay, so you all should know what is fremitus and check it up if you don't know and achieve that contact, no contact of the central incisors in static or in dynamic occlusion. So this is a case of a full mouth rehab, finished occlusion with an 8 micron paper. Look at the contacts from canine backwards. Each tooth has one good heavy contact and lighter contact on the second molar. Now, many a times people ask me that if I do a full mouth rehab or do a crown on the molar, second molar, after some time, although I have tight contacts, the contact opens up. The contact on the second molar opens up. There's food lodgement. How do I correct that? Because you have not done pathway adjustments, that contact opens up. Because now when the patient is chewing, there is heavy contact during chewing on the second molar. And because the second molar is not butted by a third molar, it is free to move on force. So when there is constant chewing force, the second molar moves backward because it can't come in the front. It goes sidewards, and there your contact opens up. And that is why whenever you are doing occlusal adjustments, keep the contact on the second molar light and do a chewing pathway adjustments with no chewing motion contacts on the second molar at all. And your problem of opening up contacts will be minimized. Okay. You see, with the 8 micron paper, I don't even have incisor contacting. Incisors should not contact when the posteriors are in contact. Only when the posteriors are biting heavily and they sink down in their PDL by 30 microns, then anterior tooth should come in contact. So if I take a 40 micron paper anterior tooth contact will happen in static occlusion, but not with the 8 micron paper. Same case, lower jaw, light contacts on the posterior teeth and one good contact from canine backwards. So achieve this in your natural dentition and in your full mouth reconstructions. When I look at a shim stock contact, each tooth posteriorly should be able to hold a shim stock. You should not be able to pull it out. If you go back and check your reconstructions with the shim stock, you'll realize that more than half of your cases have open bite. All teeth are not touching. You can feel that they are touching. So I can show you a postured contact position in which everything is looking clean, but a shim stock contact is your true test. And the shim stock should pass through anterior teeth. Look at this patient, deep bite, class 2 div 2 occlusion, 60-year-old. He has got severe friction on the anterior teeth. When I show you protrusive relation, he has got anterior guidance, no problem at all. He is meeting all requirements of mutually protected occlusion with the teeth that he has. But this is too much guidance. How does a clinician differentiate between too much guidance and optimum guidance? Optimum guidance is the one that does not come in the chewing pathway. In this case, his teeth came in the chewing pathway throughout his lifespan, and he wore them away. Palatal of the upper and labial of the lingual, labial of the lower anteriors is gone and bone down. So now I will do a reconstruction for him and see to it that I do not leave him with too much guidance. That's my goal. So first we did orthodontics for him, and then we finished up his case. At 7 years, he looks like this. When you look at his occlusion at a 7-year follow-up, none of the teeth have worn down. There is no mobility, muscle pain, joint instability. Okay. On the day when I was delivering his final occlusion, adjusting, this is his 8 micron contacts from canine backwards. Each tooth has one good contact, but no contact on the incisors. Same for the lower jaw. Okay. And then I did the pathway adjustment. This was done 7 years ago. Okay. And when he did his pathway movement, you see the incisors are in heavy contact. He has too much guidance. See the contacts on the lateral incisors and the near the incisor edge. These contacts have to be removed. Okay, so this is a very, very important slide. If you're doing aesthetic treatment, you're doing veneers, you're doing smile design, composites, anterior implants. If you leave contacts like this during chewing pathway, you will have these teeth fail. Restorations will fail or teeth will fail. Okay, but because it will happen after many years, you will usually not find this to be such a challenge. It is forgiving. That's why occlusion is forgiving. But if you want a perfect result, this is what you need to do. Get those contacts out, but keep these contacts. You see the contacts that are there close to the cervical 1/5 of the tooth of the incisor. I'm keeping because those are my MIP contacts. Those are the contacts at the end of the chewing cycle. These are the contacts at the beginning of the chewing cycle. When the teeth are coming in contact, lateral incisor is touching first. I don't want that to happen. So I take away those contacts and keep these. So I hope this is making sense to all of you. Let's see a case and revise this. Patient has fully worn dentition. Attrition, my diagnosis is occlusal dysfunction. Patient's dentition is in need of reconstruction, which I gladly do. I'm going to look at the vertical dimension on the cephalometrics. The SNMP angle, which should be around 32 degrees for a normal human being, is now 15 degrees. That means the jaw is over closed. I need to open the bite. Okay, I need to open the bite. So I'll do my face bow record, deprogram into my centric record, get the case mounted on the articulator in CR, do a wax up, and my occlusal build-up starts at the wax up. The wax up has to be perfect, has to be good. And many years ago, 23 years ago, when I did my first wax up and my first provisionals, my teacher here made me repeat it. And she made me work on that provisional for almost a month. And because of that, I have never forgotten that I need to do these steps well, because I don't want to go back. I don't want to come at 7:30 in the morning and have everything taken off from my articulator and redone. So I owe this discipline to my teachers, and thank you, ma'am, for that. So here's your occlusal build-up to see how good the occlusal anatomy is in the wax up. I'll modify, I'm going to pick up this occlusion with a putty index from the wax up and make that good occlusion in form of a provisional in the patient's mouth. Excuse me. And when you see the static contacts in centric occlusion, I've achieved one good contact on each tooth from canine backwards. On one premolar on your left-hand side of your screen, you will see a slightly heavy contact. You can take that off. But overall, a uniform contact from canine backwards. Same in the mandible. Canine backwards, all teeth have one good contact. I was still not decided what to do with that 7, so it's left like that. But eventually, I saved it. Then I do the pathway adjustment, make the patient upright, do a 200 micron paper adjustment. And now I will point out to you which are my pathway interferences. These are the contacts which need to be taken away. If you keep them in resin, the patient will wear them off eventually. But if you keep them in ceramic, the patient will break them or the teeth will move. Periodontium will become a problem. So I've taken away those pathway interferences. See the lower jaw. What you get on the buccal slope of the lingual cusp of the lower teeth and the palatal slope of the buccal cusp of the upper tooth. I've said that right, okay? Have to be taken away. So the buccal slopes of the lingual cusp of the lower teeth during pathway adjustments have to be gone. Those contacts, you don't need those. And now I have a static occlusion, which is good, and I have a dynamic occlusion, which is adjusted to the chewing pathway of the patient. I then go ahead and do my tooth preps, make my anterior restorations nice and beautiful, see that the anatomy and the morphology of the lingual surface is built up well. Then I'll do my posterior restorations and finish up the case from where I started. I changed the vertical dimension, finished up like this. I've got really good occlusion on the picture, but this picture is misleading unless you see the static and the dynamic occlusal contacts, which I will show you now. That's your occlusal picture without any contacts. And now I'm coming in with my 40 microns papers, seeing that I have uniform contacts everywhere on all the teeth. Yeah, canine backwards, each tooth should have one good contact. Forget all these smudge marks. Two important things which you have to remember. Always coat the articulating papers with Vaseline. Never use them dry. Always coat them with Vaseline. And secondly, have the tooth surface dried. If there is moisture on the tooth surface, your paper will not mark well. Okay. Upper arch, same patient, 8 micron contacts, canine backwards, all tooth. Lower arch, same patient, finished occlusion, canine backwards, each tooth having good contacts. Shim stock held by each tooth from canine backwards. Shim stock being pulled out of the incisors, should not be held by incisors. Shim stock is 8 microns thick. Okay. Then do the pathway adjustments. Pathway contacts, whatever is there on the buccal slope of the lingual cusp has to be removed. The rest all contacts don't touch. These contacts look heavy, they look lots. They look as if there's too much contact on the buccal side, but it's with a 200 micron paper. So don't reduce these, because with 8 microns, you already tested that the contacts were fine and you had good contacts on each tooth. Okay, so this is at the end of my pathway adjustment. Because you're doing occlusal adjustments always after delivery of your restorations, you need to polish your ceramic intraorally. Otherwise, your ceramic will break. Doshi here has some good intraoral ceramic polishing kits, maybe not the same one, but something equivalent. But these have to fit on your air rotors and your latch type burrs, because you'll be using them intraorally and not extraorally, not before bonding. Final occlusal adjustment is already done after bonding. 48 hours later, let the patient go back home, eat, and come back and tell you, doctor, when I was eating, something was coming in the way. So I put the paper and tell him, mark and show me what was coming in the way. And then I can adjust those markings. The feedback from the patient is very, very important. If the patient at the end of the sitting tells me, doctor, I'm feeling great, it's perfect, then I don't need any more adjustment. The patient says, I'm not feeling okay, it's still not there, I'm still not comfortable. That means he needs adjustment. If you tell the patient to go home and adapt, he will pay a price for that adaptation. He'll pay a price by breaking the teeth, by making the teeth move away from where they are or causing joint instability. Okay, so that completes what I had to discuss on natural dentition. Just a quick 10 minutes on implant occlusion and then we'll finish up. Okay. Am I doing okay with the time? Dr. Sharath, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay, so yeah, I'm going to, when we look at implant occlusion, because there is implant on one tooth and PDL on the other teeth, I need to allow the implant to get the advantage in occlusion and not get overloaded. So what I'll do is I'll make the patient bite on the 30 or 40 micron paper and let only the natural teeth touch. With light bite, there should be no contact on the implant crown. With a heavy squeezing bite, there'll be a light contact on the implant crown. Okay, so that's from your MISH textbook. That's your implant protected occlusion. Everybody can read about it. You also want canine guidance in these, but remember that even on these implant occlusions, in the end, I do pathway adjustments with the 200 micron paper with the patient upright. And at that point, there should be no pathway contact on the implant crown if you're dealing with single implants. Okay, centralize your contacts towards the central fossa. Don't have them on the slope cusp. Make narrow occlusal tables and always try to put your implant in the center of the proposed occlusal surface. These are all principles that we follow. Okay, when you have a distal extension, you can't give advantage of the PDL to absence of PDL to the implants. You have to have uniform contacts on all the teeth with a 30 micron paper. Again, there is a lot of published articles. There was a series of occlusal adjustment article published by the British Dental Journal. So if you Google BDJ series of occlusal articles, it will give you one article for each of these class types. Kennedy's class 1, what to do, class 2, what to do, class 3, what to do, class 4, what to do, full arch, what to do, natural dentition, what to do. So all that comes from that BDJ article, which was published somewhere in the late 90s. If I have a full arch implant case, as I have here a full arch case, I'm going to make ceramic versus ceramic. Okay, my occlusal adjustment has to be pristine because this is unforgiving. Many people feel that I should have plastic in one arch and ceramic in the other arch, so that if I make a mistake in occlusion, the plastic will wear down. The problem is that plastic will wear down very fast, vertical dimension will reduce, and then your pathway adjustments will go wrong. Too much overload will come during chewing because we have used plastic in one arch. So I don't believe that I should have fixed reconstructions on both arch with ceramic in one arch and acrylic or resin in the other arch. I believe that I should have both hard materials and then have good occlusal adjustments. Okay. If I want to dampen the effect, fixed in one arch and have over denture in the other arch. But if it's both fixed, I will have ceramic on both arches. And it's very difficult to find references for this because some of the references are very old. They are from the 80s when the chewing pathway was not explained very well and implant occlusion was still in its nascent stage. Today we know much better. And that is why sometimes if I can't find the answer in literature, then I either follow my teachers or my common sense. Okay. So I'm using upper and lower full arch occlusion here. I'm going to show you the markings now. For implant, I believe that apart from my handheld articulating papers, I need something which can give me a digital data of my occlusion markings. And so I find OccluSense, which is recently launched in the Indian market by Liberal Traders and Doshi Marketing, to be a much more better adjunct to my articulating papers. So I finish all my occlusal adjustment with my papers as I discussed. But in the end, I will use these 60 microns flexible color-coded sensors. So I will not only have occlusal marks, I will also have a digital analysis of these marks, and I can have uniform contacts because in a arch implant case, I do not have periodontal ligament to provide me any feedback. So I am going one extra step in these cases to do this. How does this compare with T-scan? I don't know. I've not used T-scan for 10 years. I've used OccluSense for around 6 months now, but theoretically I know that T-scan does not have any marking. So you digitally will see it, and then what you see on your software, you have to extrapolate that analytical data and imagine the cusp which you have to now grind on the patient's dentition. With this, I can see the mark and I can see the analysis and I know where to adjust. Okay, so this is how I would do occlusal adjustment. Use this in the patient's mouth, upper, lower, full arch fixed implant prosthodontics, ceramic versus ceramic. So the stakes are high, chances of failures are more, and that's why I would use this. Once I've done this, I will get graphic markings like this. On your left hand side of the screen, you see that initially I had only some peaks of red. As I went on adjusting, I had more uniform contacts, and everything now on the right hand side of the screen is in the green zone. It takes a lot of time for you to understand these markings. So we first practice this on natural dentition, and these are the markings left behind by the occlusents. So now canine backwards, each tooth having one good contact, and that's what I wanted to achieve. That's what I achieved in my analysis. Look at another patient. Again, upper and lower full arch, fixed titanium framework, ceramic versus ceramic. I have stopped using acrylic or composite in one arch because the maintenance of those cases in private practice is too high in the long term. So I would not recommend that in the present scenario with my present understanding, but we change as time goes by, and we will see. There are good materials for framework like the Bio HPP, which you can use from Braident on their implants like this. But again, there is no long-term data on that, and so we need to see how our cases will respond. But the initial results in cases like this is very, very promising. So here I'm adjusting occlusion again with my 8 micron papers, and I've got uniform occlusion on all teeth. In the implant dentition, I don't favor the incisors. Even incisors will come in contact along with the posterior teeth with a 40 micron paper. Okay, with 8 microns, I will have more heavy loads on the posterior teeth, no load on the incisors. Okay, and then I will do my pathway adjustments. That's my pathway adjustment on this case. So whatever comes on the buccal slope of the lingual cusp of the lower, labial cusp parietal slope, I'm going to reduce. You can see these markings. So I've made these arrows for you to understand that these are the chewing pathway adjustments. They have to go away. Okay, and then polish everything. And then I checked with occlusents, and I still realized that even after all this diligent management, analytically, I was still not perfect left to right. So with little adjustments, 2 or 3 of them, I got a more uniform contact, completely in the green zone, as you can see on the right hand side of the screen. And these are my final occlusal contacts with the articulating paper marks, which are in red color superimposed on the occlusents marks. Final occlusal contacts, bilateral, simultaneous, uniform. Okay. Remember that most of these occlusal contacts, I achieve them at the BISC trial. I don't do them at the final. I do them at the BISC trial because marking is easier. And if I want to add something also, I have the option to get that addition done. Once I've done 90% of my adjustments and pathway done at the BISC trial, in the end, I have to just touch up a little bit and polish the final occlusion. I've tried to publish as much as I could on this subject, but these articles are all available online for free for everyone. You can just Google them with my name and you'll find a list of them. And some of these articles in the text, I've written a lot about pathway adjustments, especially this functional occlusal adjustment with the constructive chewing pathway. I've written this in detail, what I've discussed in this webinar here. And the one with the bone eroded dentition also does complete justice to the markings of the occlusal contacts and how to adjust them. Because I found that in the olden textbooks that I referred to when I did my post-graduation, I only had diagrams in the end. I didn't have patients' data with markings, and ways to analyze those markings were missing. So we are trying to build that, bridge that gap which is there. So in conclusion, I would like to state that occlusion adjustment is an ongoing dynamic field. We have moved away from classic mutually protected occlusion. We believe that anterior guidance should be there, but it should be within the chewing pathway of the patient's chewing cycle. And that is why if you have to take home something from today's webinar, it's the purchase of a 200 micron paper and making the patient upright at the end of your treatment and seeing that there are no chewing pathway adjustments. If you search by the name of Dr. John Coyce and his colleagues, you will find a lot of articles based on these chewing pathway adjustments online. I would like to thank Dr. Sharat Shetty, Dr. Saloni Mistry Dr. Pramit Bhanga for giving me this opportunity. Their numbers are here. Please get in touch with them and renew your memberships for the IPS. We are trying to bridge the gap between the clinical science and the university-based practices here with these eminent clinicians. And a big thank you to Dr. Ram and Dr. Karmarkar for being there on this webinar. And thank you to Dentist Channel Online for all the technical help and the great support. And thank you to Bradent and Doshi Marketing and all of you for giving me a patient hearing. I end my presentation here and I wait for your further instructions. Should I stop sharing?
Yes, Dr. Ali. Can you please stop your screen share? It was indeed, as always, an excellent brainstorming session with excellent scientific content, with so much of simplicity and clinical expertise. Thank you so much, Dr. Ali. I now request our expert panelist, Dr. Sabita Ram, to kindly share her valuable feedback and her opinion regarding this topic.
Dr. Ali, wonderful lecture. As precise as you can be and as informative you can be. Can you hear me? Yeah. So Ali, I'm always proud of you and the way you present. It has been extremely informative to not only the postgraduate students, but for all people who are watching you live.
Thank you.
A dentist always gives more importance to aesthetics and the patient also. When he looks at it's looking very good, but we often forget the occlusion. And that is why you said very correctly, occlusion is forgiving. So we should not allow it to forgive us, because ultimately it is going to lead to temporomandibular joint problem, probably fractures of the restoration, and the patient will keep coming back to you, or maybe he will go into some type of a perio problem. Very nicely put, planning and having your provisional restorations. And one point here which you mentioned is that we can plan our occlusion at the time of your provisional restorations by using your articulating paper. Don't try to put it at the end and then find out that what occlusion you have planned is not the occlusion the patient needs, because you have told us in this lecture, and all postgraduate students who are watching us, please remember that pathway of motion, of envelope of motion, is the most important point to remember in a full mouth case, because here we have discussed most of the full mouth cases. One point which I often tell the students is, do your occlusion with a reclined position. I think somebody can take up a topic and see how occlusion changes. I even ask them to ask the patient to stand and tell me whether the patient is comfortable or not when the patient is standing. Because upright position, yes, final occlusion should be corrected. You can't correct it while the patient is standing. But if you ask the patient to stand and move a little and tell you whether he's comfortable or not, that is really important. And shim stocks. If you ask anybody what are shim stocks, I think even the general practitioners, unless they are really focused in their occlusion equilibration, do not know what are shim stocks. So please buy shim stocks. And he rightly said, don't put it on your full occlusion. Put it on each tooth. And if you put it on each tooth, you will know whether there is a tight contact or there is no contact at all in that area. Another point which he mentioned is that we all have to go to the maximum intercuspal position. Here, a point which I would like to make is, in a full mouth case, yes, we move from the, maybe he has a deranged occlusion, and we have to establish our occlusion at the NIP, which is also going to be the centric occlusion and at the centric relation. So all three will be the same. But in a patient who is having only a single restoration to be done, maybe a fixed partial denture, would you want to equilibrate the occlusion before giving him that fixed partial denture? That's the only question which I'd like to put, and you can answer after this. So he has mentioned about the COIS deprogrammer. We have a lot of deprogrammers, but I think the COIS, people have to start having faith in the COIS, because you can do the occlusal adjustment with the COIS in place.
It's no other deprogrammer.
You cannot do it. You cannot adjust the occlusion in any other way. If you say I deprogrammed and I took an occlusion and I'm making my provisional, is not going to help you. So I think let us make a policy that all of us are going to start following the Coy's deprogrammer. And about the disocclusion in the posterior area, I think that's very rightly said. Please do not have too much of posterior disocclusion. Just because there's disocclusion, there's not going to be there. You have to see the envelope of motion. And lastly, very rightly said that we did have the T-scan, but now we have the occlusion sensor. And that would also give you the final adjustments, which you can see, but I think all will not be able to afford it. So let us stick to our articulating paper, and for research purposes, we can go into the T-scan. So thank you, Ali. Really wonderful lecture, and God bless you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. So
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Question.
Yes,
That's a
Ali,
question
you
which I
can
asked.
address to the questions now.
yeah, the question was that in routine dentistry, when you're doing a single crown or a fixed partial denture, do we always equilibrate? So the answer is depends on the overall occlusal morphology. If the occlusal morphology is good, patient doesn't have any mobility in any tooth, doesn't have any muscle problems, and does not complain of any joint pain. The joints are healthy. That means his system has now adapted to this particular malocclusion, if we can call it that. Then in that case, I will make my restoration conform to the existing malocclusion without coming in the way further. So I will do the pathway adjustment, but I'll conform to the existing occlusal scheme. But if the patient has muscle pain, if there is mobility of some teeth, or if the patient has complained of joint pain, then I need to start with CR as my treatment position. And for that, I will need to deprogram the patient, and then equilibration will be mandatory.
Thank you, Ali. You also made one statement is about the brain decides the pathway.
Yeah.
And that is why if there is a problem in such cases, you need to equilibrate right at the time of diagnosis and treatment plan.
True.
You cannot start doing it at the time when you have given the fixed partial denture, maybe a single tooth, and then plan your occlusal. And one more point which you mentioned, I forgot, is fremitus.
Yeah.
Fremitus, I think most of the students and maybe practitioners forget to test it. So we are not going to discuss it here. We let them start reading about fremitus and say how they're going to check occlusion and fremitus. Thank you. And I have no other questions. You were superb. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next panelist, Dr. Milind Karmarkar, kindly please give your valuable feedback, sir.
Do I need to share the screen? I can't hear you.
Sir, you need to have a question answer session addressed to Dr. Ali and your valuable comments and feedback for the session.
Do I
You
have
have
to
any
go for
questions?
sharing the?
No, just ask.
sir.
Just go
No,
on
sir.
talking. We can hear you.
No,
We can hear
I'm
you,
not
sir.
on
You
the-
have to.
No, you don't have to share, you just speak.
because I can't. Okay. Excellent presentation as usual, Ali.
Thank you, sir.
And I still remember you are the only staff or PG that has ever asked for gingival composite. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember. Long back. Yeah.
Long back, yeah. And I don't think any other person has used this. So that tells your interest in the subject and your passion. But I appreciate the practical aspect of your presentation. It was very nice so that we could actually see what is, because there's a lot of theory in occlusion and there's not much of practical, and there's a lot of confusion because of that theory. So you actually showed us practically what is occlusion and how to get it right. The basic thing is, of course, the form and function, form follows function and vice versa, right from the wax pattern as you showed. So this wax pattern is very important. And the other aspect which I like, which I also believe in, is test driving your occlusion with temporaries, whether it's a full arch or a FPD or an implant case. Then there is where you learn what your problems are and you can overcome them in your final restoration. You can't do that directly. So that test driving your occlusion or articulation with temps is very important, especially after deprogramming. And the other thing very important is to evaluate the existing occlusion, because like a fingerprint, occlusion is different for everyone. You can't go by just one principle, or as you said very rightly, and how to evaluate it in each patient with the TMD and muscles also So what I think is we have to see, hear, feel, use our five senses. And that is very important. You can do that by, even if you touch a tooth with your gloved finger and ask the patient to bite on a molar, you will feel the vibration, especially an implant. You'll know which tooth or implant is getting maximum force. So by seeing, your articulating paper will show you, and you can feel it with your, or even if you use a stethoscope, you can feel, or you can hear the occlusion. Okay, now the force and timing of occlusion was not seen before. That was seen first by the T-scan and now by the occlusion sense. Having used both, I have to say that the occlusense was took a long time in its making, but it's a wireless device, so it's more convenient to use. It marks the teeth and it gives you both the force and timing. Now, what is timing of occlusion? That is very important. Is which tooth or cusp touches first. That gives the maximum force. So you have to see that many of them touch at the same time. So that timing was very important. And the other thing I feel is that disclusion is very important. The timing of disclusion will also be given by these devices. Now, the other most important factor, the driving force of occlusion, is the muscles. And very rightly, you have to deprogram and evaluate them, whether there are any muscle problems that are occurring, because the engine that gives the force which damages most of our teeth TMD is the muscles. So the myomonitor or muscle devices should also be used. And lastly, I feel that basically there's a lot of difference between occlusion in your removable prosthesis, whether it's complete or partial, your FPDs and your implants. So all these are totally different from each other and should be followed accordingly to get the proper occlusal equilibration. Finally, it's a matter of biofunctional biomechanics which you use, and shim stock very importantly will give you disclusion. I think disclusion is more important than occlusion, because occlusion is there for everybody to see, but disclusion you can only see with your shim stock. So with that, I think I have to congratulate you. Excellent. And occlusion is a thinking man's subject, and you have to test drive it and try it out. And then the final force finishing, which can be done by this device, is very important. So thank you very much. And it's a privilege to be here.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Milind. We now move on to our president, Dr. Sharad Shetty, sir, to give his valuable thoughts for our session.
Unmute.
Kindly unmute yourself, sir. Thank you.
Before I start my comments, I would want both Saloni and Permit to ask their set of questions, if any. Otherwise, I'll wind up the program and get back.
Okay, so Ali, we have a buzzer round of questions for you here. There are like almost 50 plus questions, but we have probably shortlisted a few. And are you ready, Ali?
Yeah, I'm ready.
I will compile and ask. You have any questions on your side?
Well, so Ali, to begin with, is occlusion unique to every individual?
Yes, occlusion is unique, and every human being's adaptive capacity is different. So that is why we see a lot of people with malocclusion surviving throughout their lives without getting orthodontics and full mouth rehabs done. And sometimes people have really nice, good set of teeth, but they're still suffering with joint problems and muscle pain. So it's this wide bandwidth of problems that we face with occlusion and sometimes none, which leads to the difficulty in the subject, when to treat and when not to treat. So that's, yeah.
Okay. How do we record the envelope of motion?
So the best way to record the envelope of motion is to make the patient sit upright on the dental chair, dry the teeth, and then put a 200 micron paper and tell the patient to chew on the paper as if he's chewing gum. He has to eat the paper, basically. Okay, 2-3 strokes on each side. And then you remove the paper, make the patient recline, tell him not to touch his teeth together, and then observe what you have seen. What contacts have come, and then based on the arrows that I showed you, you adjust the occlusion. But yes, we always record the envelope of function, like when we do a Gothicast tracing. We are recording the envelope of function in that plane. So if you have 6 sensors on both the ears and the mouth up to the maxilla and mandible, then a pantographic tracing can actually give you the ideal envelope of function, but that's not clinically going to be applicable for us. But in theory, yeah. So we can find out the envelope of function for a patient and then record their chewing pathway with the 200 micron paper and see if it matches and whether the chewing pathway is within that envelope which we have marked. So there is a large amount of data which we can accumulate from our country, from our postgraduates, which needs to be done, which all you eminent teachers can now take up and give us the answers as clinicians as to what we should do.
Ali, we have learned about the bull's eye. So somebody wants to know that how do you actually evaluate the bull's eye type of marking on the articulating paper, and are there different types of articulating paper to kind of give you the differentiation?
So the articulating paper numbers I already mentioned. I keep red and blue colors with me so that sometimes I can mark the centric contacts in red and the pathway contacts in blue. So wherever red and blue contact merge with each other, that point does not have to be cut. As far as Bull's law is concerned, it's the buccal of upper, lingual of lower. It really doesn't, it's a good principle to follow, but sometimes I'm not, it's in my subconscious. I'm not looking at the cusp and saying, okay, this is lingual cusp of the lower, so let me not grind it. Whatever comes in the way to get uniform contacts, cusp to fossa, from canine backwards, one good contact on each tooth, and whatever comes in the outside of the pathway motion, that's what I'm removing, and that's because the Bull's law and the MUDB or MUDL law becomes too theoretical to be, it's good on an articulator, but not great in a patient's mouth to mark and follow.
Dr. Parmeet, over to you now.
A very excellent presentation, sir.
Thank you, sir.
There is a query about how do you stabilize the BIS trial while doing occlusal adjustments?
Great question. So somebody has tried it. Basically, what I do is I put KY jelly into the crowns and I put them. If I am having very small unretentive restorations, then I could even use a temporary cement. Get the markings adjusted done, remove it, and then send it for glazing.
Okay. And what about full mouth rehab implant cases? What kind of occlusal load should be kept for the maxillary or mandibular second molar? If it's 7 to 7, not 6 to 6.
Yeah, so occlusal contact should be from canine backwards. Each tooth should have the ability to hold the shim stock.
Okay.
Shim stock should pass through the incisors, and then pathway adjustments should be done to allow the anterior guidance that you have established to be within the chewing pathway so that it doesn't interfere with the function of the teeth.
So what about the occlusal table for the mandibular second molar? Is that to be reduced in width?
No, if it's natural teeth, it's the same, because the width of the natural tooth, you can't reduce it too much. Otherwise, you will biomechanically increase the risk on the tooth. So you will have the same occlusal table for a natural tooth, but adjust the occlusion to be having a lighter contact on the 7. But in an implant, yeah, the occlusion table can be narrow.
Yeah, so that gives an added advantage of stability of the implant.
Yeah. Force per unit area is lesser, so that's the principle.
So if in case there is a collapsed VD, totally collapsed VD, what about the occlusal scheme we should go about? Like how to develop in provisions and then go about in the final restoration?
So you do your facial analysis, do your cephalometric analysis, increase the vertical dimension, deprogram the patient, mount it on an articulator, increase the vertical based on your judgment from the patient's face and cephalometrics, how much the vertical should be. Then set the articulator at that vertical and get a wax up done, establishing the upper plane from an aesthetic standpoint. And then build up the morphology, make putty index of that wax up, bond the provisionals in the patient's mouth, adjust the occlusion based on all the principles we discussed, and then you can do quadrant-wise preparations and final restorations if you want to keep it simple.
So how long do we need to keep the provisions in mouth before we go ahead with in this collapse case where we...
So if the patient has no muscular instability and no joint problem, the optimum period for a provisional restoration for test driving is around 1 to 2 weeks.
Okay, sir.
Yeah? But in that 1 to 2 weeks, if the patient reports negative symptoms, that you make the provision and now I have pain, that means you have gone in the wrong direction. So then I will adjust the occlusion and wait for another 2 weeks from there.
Fine, sir. That's it from us. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, ma'am. You have to unmute. You have to unmute, ma'am.
Madam, please unmute yourself.
Ali very rightly said about cephalogram, because we've done this project on cephalograms, and they should see not only at the time of diagnosis, but the time of provisional and the final also. Because when suddenly you have to increase, I would say restore the vertical dimension, they are in a desert. They don't know where to reach and how much to open. So if they take a cephalogram and analyze it, once they analyze it, what should be the NP angle, then they should start with their provisional restoration. And then again analyze at the time. Very rightly said, Ali. They please, all postgraduate students should make sure they take their lateral ceph at the time of the time of diagnosis, treatment planning, at the time of your provisional restorations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. At the outset, I must tell that Ali has just spoken about one small aspect of the full mouth rehabilitation. In fact, I think even the exhaustive courses conducted across the globe, and besides Ali himself, would go beyond 3 to 4 days. So I'm sure that there are too many questions asked related to what topic we have addressed today, but we have been very specific about how the teeth should meet. And Ali has given us a plethora of brilliant ideas, informations, and most importantly, the interpretation of what is being marked, what type of articulators they use or tools. Owning a big tool and different types of material does not take you to get good occlusion. What you should do is that I think you should put your mind into gear and find out how to read them and accordingly do the change. I think that's the most important takeaway. For me, the last 30 years with practice and my teachers teaching me, and obviously a very close association with Ali has allowed me to understand what is the importance of good contacts, and more importantly, what is the importance of no contact at all at wherever it is important. That's the most important takeaway, because that affects the efficiency and the comfort of the whole system. And most importantly, what I understand is that I need to do a regular follow-up to find out what I have done today, does it lead to any irreversible breakdowns? I think the most important lesson I have learned in my career through my parents, teachers, associates, is not to do more harm to anybody because we are not able to do something good for them. I think that's the most important takeaway. But Ali, having said this, and very relevant to today's topic, many questions have come up, but I've sorted it. One of the things is that if you are using the Cois deprogrammer, would you be able to tell our viewers of how much time you should use, how long you should use it, and briefly, can you tell, people are confused that you can use it intraorally for equilibration. I'm sure that in a very few small sentences, you can address this.
Yeah, sure. So the minimum time for deprogramming is could be as less as half an hour, and the maximum time cannot be more than 4 weeks. So if you have not deprogrammed in 4 weeks, you have not done something right with the deprogrammer. Optimally, I see in the clinic that most patients who wear the deprogrammer at home, within 24 to 72 hours, they are deprogrammed. So how do you check that the patient is deprogrammed? On the day you deliver the Cois deprogrammer, you take your 40 micron paper and ask the patient to bite on the ramp, and you will realize that most of the times the patient is not closing at the same point. But after they are deprogrammed, when you recheck the contacts after 48 to 72 hours, they should be able to close comfortably at one point only on the ramp. And apart from that, they will also not report any joint instability or pain and muscle discomfort. That means the patient is now deprogrammed. Once the patient is deprogrammed and natural dentition is in the purview, and you want to do equilibration so that MIP is in harmony with CR, you will start reducing the ramp with your burrs so that the vertical dimension goes on reducing. Vertical dimension is reducing from the ramp. So you are not actually grinding teeth at this point, you're only grinding the ramp. And the vertical dimension goes on reducing little by little. At some point, a time comes when apart from the ramp, one of the posterior tooth or anterior tooth may start touching, usually posterior. And at that point, the patient will say that, okay, something at the back is now touching. And you know that you're very close to your occlusal contact. So at that point, you take 200 micron paper, horseshoe shape, and put it in the patient's mouth and get that first mark done. So that's your first point of contact. That means that you are within 200 microns of achieving occlusal harmony now. At this point, you adjust that contact which you've got on the tooth, and the ramp will start to touch again. Now you take a 40 micron paper and go on adjusting the ramp till more teeth come in contact. Then you adjust the teeth till the ramp comes in contact. Then you adjust the ramp till the teeth come in contact. You shift now to a 8 micron paper. At a time will come when the ramp is totally destroyed. Now you don't need the deprogrammer, and you have now achieved come close to a 8 micron contact with all your posterior teeth, and you have now achieved your occlusal harmony, and static occlusion is taken care of. Yeah, that's how we do it.
Correct. Now the second thing is that in full mouth rehab, whether it's on natural or implant prosthesis, we know the importance of mock-up and provisional. But the material that we use, they are susceptible to wear and tear. So again, I would want you to emphasize on how long would you want a mock-up or a provisional to be in the mouth to make sure that there is a balance between the various systems, various parts of the system. And then the second question I'll ask post that.
Yeah. So see, basically you will make a provisional or a full mouth mock-up only when the patient's joint is stable. That means you are using this provision now only to test drive for aesthetics first and test drive for function. If you've done your functional pathway adjustments and the patient goes home, he sees in the mirror and it's looking good, and he tries to eat food and he comes back and tells you, I can eat everything, I don't have any problem. Then you can start your final restoration as early as 48 hours. You don't need to wait further because the joint is stable, muscles are stable, patient is happy with the way it looks, nothing is breaking, so you don't need to wait. But due to some reason, if you need to wait, then maximum waiting time with the provision should be around 3 to 4 weeks. Beyond that, you are just buying time for the patient to be ready to get to the next phase. In private practice, nobody is waiting for the provision for a long time. They want to get it over with. But if I have to theoretically look at it, I see 1 or 2 weeks as the optimum period beyond which I want to then get on with the final work, because when the provisions start to break, they start to harbor food particles, periodontal health starts to suffer, gingiva becomes inflamed. So I don't want to wait for all those side effects to happen. So 1 or 2 weeks is max and get on with it.
Two more quick questions before we wind up. One is that for beginners, would you suggest sequencing the full mouth treatment? I understand with too much of experience, there could be a little of fast tracking, but for beginners, I think there should be some SOPs to make sure that they don't go wrong.
Theoretically speaking, if I made a good, well-adjusted provisional, I can then go on and remove 1-1 provision and make 1-1 final crown, like crown and bridge. I don't even need to go to a semi-adjustable articulator for that. Every crown will merge into the occlusion that has been finalized with the provisional, but that would be too tedious for the patient. So what I do generally is I do the upper anteriors and the lower anteriors first, get my occlusion, let my occlusion be in posterior provisionals and do the anterior finals first, and then go ahead with the upper and lower posterior teeth at the same time. If I have to choose and break down further, then upper anteriors first, next phase lower anteriors, then both upper posteriors, and then both lower posteriors. I don't like doing one side posteriors first and then the other side, because my occlusal plane goes wrong in the lab. So I prefer to get the plane right with sequencing that way. And sometimes in practice, to allow the patient to arrange for the finances, we break up the case. So it's upper anteriors first, then lower anteriors, then upper posteriors, then lower posteriors.
The last one, Ali, I want you to tell me about the aura around these soft night guards which people are using left, right, and center.
So soft night guards are basically only to buy time till you figure out what to do. They don't really do anything for the patient. If you need to give a hard night guard, it has to be a hard acrylic night guard. And nowadays you can make these from acrylic sheets with your BioStar type vacuum pressed machines. So you have Liberal Traders has thick 3 or 4 millimeter thick occlusal sheets, which can be pressed into hard occlusal night guards. Now, when you deliver this night guard, please don't just deliver and tell the patient to go away. The night guard also has to be equilibrated to get at least 5 uniform contacts throughout the arch, 2 on both posteriors and 1 on the anterior. Then only it's a good night guard. Otherwise, it's a painful experience for the patient to wear a night guard and have only a fulcrum contact on one side and nothing else touches. And that can lead to TMJ problems actually. So a thick 3 to 4 millimeter thick hard acrylic night guard, which is well equilibrated, is what is required. Otherwise, the soft bleaching tray materials are flimsy and don't really achieve anything. They are for people who have not figured out what to do, basically.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. I think I will sum up in a minute by saying that occlusion is like a bus with you as a driver, driving because it has a lot of passengers, which is like full of concepts, opinions, patient variations, adaptive capabilities, operator skill, lab support, occlusal adjustment tools, follow-ups, and so many things. And I think the driver has to make sure that all these passengers are well understood, their destinations are taken care of. And I think today's present and the challenge for the driver is how to deliver all of them for the betterment of the patient. And Ali has showed us some path to get this. So in the end, I think I can just sum up that today's lecture has addressed most of the concern. And I think the takeaway is that every patient is different from one another as far as occlusion is concerned. But some of the things that you need to, at the end of the treatment, achieve is that uniform bilateral contact. Please understand all of them. Uniform means something. Bilateral contact means in canine backward means something. The second one is that it should have no influence on the joint and muscles and aggravate any of the problems associated with them. And last but not least, envelope of movement, whatever you may call, I would say that it is unhindered dynamic movement with pathway adjustment done properly. Last but not the least is that what you see today may not be what is tomorrow. There is a need for these patients to be recalled on a regular follow-up checks to make sure that what has been done today exists. And that's why when I see some of the Ali's pictures, both today's presentation and otherwise in private meetings with him, we see 7 to 10 years of follow-ups. And I now know why they last that long. Thank you, Ali. I think it has been a great day with you. And I really appreciate having taken our invitation and address our first webinar. Thank you very much. And for all the viewers out there, this is not the end of the things. IPS Mumbai Navi Mumbai branches will reconvene again with another important clinical theme, and we will come out with those promotions sooner. Thank you very much. Over to Saloni.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sharat Shetty. Thank you so much, Dr. Ali. It was indeed an excellent, I would say, brunch, Sunday morning brunch on occlusion and full mouth rehabilitation. I think all of us are completely, full. But yes, we have much more to go now. At this behest, I first and foremost thank the IPS head office, President Dr. G.R. Patel, Secretary Dr. Rupesh Rupsi for having the confidence in us, for believing in us and inspiring us. I thank our beloved speaker for today, Dr. Ali Tunkiwala, for enlightening us one more time as usual. So very beautiful a session. I sincerely thank our expert panelists, Dr. Savita Ram and Dr. Milind Karmarkar, to be with us here and spare their valuable time with us here today and sharing their knowledge and expertise.
Thank you.
A big thank you and a sincerely supporting us to our academic partners, Brident and Doshi Marketing, for supporting us for this webinar session. A very big gratitude to Rubin Lobo Dentist Channel Online for making this pan-India, making it reach all over India, our first online webinar session. Thank you so much, Rubin, for this support that you have given us, and looking forward for many more to come. And yes, of course, we have to thank our IPS Mumbai Navi Mumbai branch, which has rejuvenated itself after the 44th IPS Conference 2016 with a bang. And above all, our beloved members, students, for being here with us for this last 2 hours and participated in this event with a promise to share more knowledge. Looking forward to an array of events awaiting all of you. I humbly bow down. I thank you so much for this great beginning of our IPS Mumbai Navi Mumbai branch. Until we meet again. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us here today. I would request all the other questions of the attendees and the participants to be mailed to us on Indian Prosthodontic Society, MNM@gmail.com. We will talk to Dr. Ali and answer all your questions back to your email. So kindly identify yourselves, from which college you are. You're a student, you're a private practitioner. Kindly become IPS members as soon as possible. And we are launching our website as ASAP within the next 15 days. please kindly email to us. It is shared in your chat box, Indian Prosthodontic Society, MNM@gmail.com. Thank you once again. Looking forward to seeing you all either online or in presentia very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Yeah. Good day, everybody.
Thank you.